What's going on, Meat Mafia? Welcome back to another episode of the Meat Mafia podcast. Before we get rolling here today, we want to give a quick shout out to you, the listener. We are so thankful to have you on board with the Meat Mafia, and we cannot thank you enough for your endless support. Without you guys, we are nothing. So thank you so much for your comments, feedback, likes, subscribes, listens, everything. It means the world to us. With that being said, please go to your podcast medium's platform, give us a 5-star review. If it's not 5 stars, maybe don't give us a review. Subscribe, do the whole thing. We really appreciate that. And also, please go check out some of the links below. We have some great sponsors, and they are killing it in the world of food and providing great high-quality food for people just like yourself. Quickly outlining our sponsors, we have Holy Cow Beef, Rick Ranches, Equip Foods, and the Carnivore Bar. These are all great products. If you want to learn more, go check out the links below. Without further ado, here's a word from our sponsors. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Equip Foods. Equip provides a complete source of grass-fed beef protein with no added chemicals, fillers, binding agents, or artificial coloring or sweeteners. If you're familiar with the supplement industry, you know that most supplements are loaded with ingredients that you can't even pronounce. Equip's Unflavored Prime has one single ingredient derived directly from grass-fed beef protein. For purists like ourselves who try to only consume balanced, real sources of nutrition, this protein powder checks all the boxes. Go check them out in the link below and use our promo code in the description to get a discount. Holy Cow Beef is a regenerative farm based out of Lubbock, Texas, with humanely raised grass-fed, grass-finished beef available for sale and shipment. Companies like ButcherBox source from outside of the US and Australia and don't specifically have the American Grass-Fed Association, or AGA, label, but Holy Cow does. They also sell chicken and pork in addition to their amazingly high-quality beef raised right here in Texas. Ann and Warren Weldon have overcome their own health struggles, and they have inspired us through the way that they choose to live their lives and the way they raise their animals. So please support them and go check out their website in the link below. Also, if you're in Colorado, go check out Rick Ranches, a grass-fed, grass-finished regenerative farm servicing all over Colorado. He also accepts Bitcoin, so all you Bitcoiners out there, go hit up Rick Ranches and get your beef today. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by the Carnivore Bar. The Carnivore Bar is an animal-based, shelf-stable product with only 3 simple ingredients: beef, tallow, and salt. The bar is inspired by the ancient traditions of Native Americans who needed to create pemmican bars to preserve meat for long-distance travel. The Carnivore Bar is perfect for animal-based athletes or busy people looking to follow a low-carb diet. It's easy to throw in a bag and take with you anywhere you're going, whether it's a workout, hike, or even packing it for a snack at work. I throw them in my triathlon bag and take down a bar immediately after working out. They're a fantastic product, so go check them out and use our discount code in the link below. Sound good?
Beautiful. Thanks for doing this, man.
Thanks for having me. It's fun.
We were saying that you've been on our list for a while. We wanted to sit down and talk to you, so we appreciate you coming on. And we were also saying before we hit record how we unofficially met in February for the first time at the Beef Initiative event in Coopers. And we helped Slim put that event together. And we noticed that you were right in the front asking Cole from KNC a bunch of questions.
Grilling the rancher.
Yeah. And that was, the way that I understand it, that was pretty influential for you, right? Because prior to that, you were just getting your meat from the grocery store and weren't really thinking about sourcing directly from a rancher. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was looking to find a rancher that I could work with, and Cole was there. Basically I found out that I would need to get a deep freezer, so I think I went home and looked for a deep freezer. There was a deal at Costco, $300 for a nice deep freezer for my garage. I was like, all right, I'm buying this. Cole, when can you give me some money? And he went through all of the different cuts with me. He's like, and I know what steaks I like, what I don't like, so got half a cow, and I think it ended up being like $6 per pound. And even if you amortize the $300 I paid for the fridge, I think it ends up being $7 a pound or something. And it's like, and that it's been some of the best meat. I was telling my wife today, like we just did like a 3-week trip. Like the burgers that I cooked at home from his ground beef, better than anything that I tasted while I was on the road. It's not like bad steaks or
Mm-hmm.
anything. Like, you go to Scotland, they have like 30-day dry aged ribeyes.
Yeah.
But you know, like that ground beef is freaking tasty, and you know, you could mix spices into it, and I guess that's technically more of a meatloaf. But I have my way of cooking things that I really enjoy, and the quality of that beef was just amazing. I don't have to go to Costco; it's taken care of, and I don't have to worry about inflation, at least while I still have a stock of it. So
Yeah.
you know, it was nice.
Have you found yourself cooking more of your meals? I'm assuming yes. But...
Well, I've been doing that for a while.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my wife was complaining about how she would have to cook me a different thing. So I was like, you know what? I could cook a lot of this stuff. So, and you know, cook for the kids sometimes too. So, you know, and I like smoking and grilling. So, like after that conversation, it was like, all right, I want to get the Kamado Joe and you know start smoking and learned how to smoke some meat and yeah, I mean, I was getting my meat from Costco, but you know, now that I have you know, some from a local rancher, it's really nice. I also have the Auto Wild Grill, which is really nice because you can sear things at like 1500 degrees, like outdoor, and you know, you get restaurant quality stuff, and it's just. Yeah, I mean, I can't complain about like what I get to eat. It's incredible.
Yeah.
We've been eyeing that Auto Wild Grill.
Yeah,
it looks sweet.
Yeah, we were listening to one of Safe's podcasts where he was talking about it.
Yeah.
And just how hot it gets, so like how quickly it gets to that temperature.
Yeah.
So we need to step up.
Oh,
and get one.
it's I mean, it's fairly cheap now. I mean,
Really?
it used to be like $1,100 or something, but they kept lowering it, and like there's so much competition now for those. So I think Beefer was their main competitor, but go on Amazon, there's like 18 like Chinese manufacturers that'll give you like one for $200 or something. Wanted to go with the Auto Wild because I know that they do a good job, and I don't know, it's amazing, and you can it gets that really nice sear on a steak, and you want a little bit of that char.
Yes.
And I like my steaks kind of on the rarish side. So if I've already defrosted it, a nice piece of steak, I just auto wild it, and that's it. I don't need
So
to
simple.
cook it on anything else or whatever, and it's delicious. Yeah. So
Jimmy, what do you think it was about that Beef Initiative event in February that made you say, okay, I'm no longer going to go from Costco, I want to buy directly from a rancher? Was it Cole's story?
well, no, I bought his meat and I tried it out. Like I literally went. I bought like the $250 tomahawk ribeyes he had. I cooked it at home. It was delicious. I'm like, how do I get more? I mean, it's really it's not a very complicated thing.
Yeah.
You know, I tried a product on the market. It was a good price, so I bought more of it. That's it. It's capitalism 101.
Yeah. Look, he's done a great job kind of incorporating Bitcoiners into his whole idea and vision for how he wants to grow his business. I think it's actually worked out really well for him, just, you know, accommodating Bitcoiners and letting them pay in Bitcoin. And the Bitcoin community is obviously incredibly supportive of everything he's doing. But there's something there too with like the parallels between Bitcoin and whether it's food security or food quality or access to beef. There's interesting parallels there. Do you think about that ever? Like,
oh, all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, because there's a reason why there's a lot of Bitcoiners that are at least investigating carnivory and things like that. It's because we've been lied so much about money, right? That we start thinking, okay, well, you know, like clearly after you learn about Bitcoin, you find out things like fractional reserve banking, Federal Reserve, all kind of like just deficit spending, how banks work, how they just print money into existence through loans and all that stuff. You realize, okay, this is not what I thought it was at all. And you start investigating other stuff, and especially with something like food, kind of like money, it's something that you know, essentially interact with every single day. So, you know, you start looking into food and it's like, okay, that's not what I thought it was, you know, like, you know, carbs and like breakfast cereal and soda and, you know, juices and all kinds of stuff. You realize, okay, what I've been told versus what the reality is are just so divergent, and this reminds me of something. It totally reminds me of the money rabbit hole that I went down. And so I think a lot of Bitcoiners, at the very least, they start with, okay, there are clearly things that are bad for you, right? Like it's like processed foods, the Chips Ahoy cookies and McDonald's shakes or whatever, and fries and whatever. Like you just cut out the really bad stuff. You're already like 70% better than 70% of the population at least. Yep. And then you start going further and you realize, okay, like these things are bad for me, these things are bad for me, and you just sort of like test it on yourself, right? And that's a wonderful thing about food that you can't necessarily do with money. It's you can feel the difference, right. And that's I think for me been a big part of my journey, and I'm sure it's been for a lot of Bitcoiners as well. But yeah, that parallel is just, you're told one thing by the people that have an interest in making you believe whatever they tell you, and the reality of the situation is just completely different than what they tell you.
Yeah, and the self-experimentation too is an important piece. I remember, I think 2019 was when I started to go carnivore because I wanted to heal some pretty gnarly autoimmune issues that I had. And I was working at a tech company in New York, and so at the time I had just started getting into cooking. So I was making very simple carnivore dishes, just ground beef thrown into a Tupperware container, chopped up steak. And I had coworkers that were legitimately 30 to 50 pounds overweight, having Mountain Dew and going to happy hours, and they were looking at me like, "You're gonna kill yourself." And I'm like, right? And I'm like,
it's so backwards.
Right, and we're eating red meat, and like, I feel the best I've ever felt. I'm healing my stomach, but it's that self-experimentation that you're talking about. But so many people have just been lied to about nutrition and the monetary system. It's interesting.
Yeah, and I've seen this, right? Like with even stuff like COVID, right? It's like just people think that they know something because they've been told something by the authorities. And it's this sort of like alternate model of knowledge that they have, that they think they know something because they've been told something rather than something that they verified by themselves. And this is something that we preach in Bitcoin is verify, don't trust. Verify. And as soon as you trust, there's this like giant security hole where they can sell you stuff that you don't need or might even be really bad for you. And that's unfortunately been the case with food, where they tell you, okay, well, broccoli is healthy, or low-fat food is healthy, or whatever. And it's like, okay, like the more you investigate, the more you realize, okay, this is not true at all. And the people that are the fattest are the ones that are eating, like high-carb diets and stuff like that. And I find it super interesting that like the low carb, it started with low carb, and it's done so well, and it's sort of proven itself over time, and like even for something as simple as weight loss, and people just feel good on it, and it's like, okay, but you do something with carbs, it's like, you don't feel so good. It's so obvious. I don't know.
We had a doctor on, Dr. Gary Fedke. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he basically got ostracized in Australia for recommending a low-carb diet to cure diabetes. Oh, wow. And, he was on the surgery teams cutting people's limbs off, and he's trying to just prevent more people from being on his operating table, and they put him through the ringer. He was going up and presenting in front of all the boards, and just taking a step back and looking at it objectively, it's like, this man is truly trying to do what's best for his patients, and he's getting villainized in a way that is almost like, it's insane to think about.
Well, there's sort of like this industrial complex that builds up around this stuff, and I blame fiat money to a large degree, because you can sort of like build up moats in your own industry around your interests and not the public's interests by doing that, and sell it to them as if it's good for them. And this is how all these industrial complexes work. And, we get that phrase from Eisenhower, who said, the military-industrial complex. And he was talking about how there was a whole, industry of things that weren't necessarily good for the country, but it was good for the complex, right?
Right.
And that was sort of like the first one, but there's been a lot of other industrial complexes that have sort of built around government, and you can do that when you have fiat money because you can always sort of get subsidized, and you can use propaganda to your advantage, and use and continue to suck from the government team. And unfortunately, with food, there's a lot of money to be made by selling industrial sludge and getting people to believe that eating lots of sugar is good for you somehow. And I don't know. I don't know if you guys watch like those YouTube videos of the vegans that look just completely unhealthy, and it's just like, wow. I'd like what kind of like reality distortion field does that put on some of these people where they can't even see it, right? Like they're all bones and they think they're healthy.
Yeah.
It's just mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
What's interesting is when you come across someone that was formerly plant-based or vegan, and they start to go animal-based and they reintroduce animal products, just how good they feel, the vibrancy, this vitality that they have. And they're trying to do the right thing by going vegan. So they're kind of extremists to begin with. They think that they're being healthier, and then once they understand the right narrative on nutrition, they feel the effects immediately, and they want to like tell everyone else about it because it feels so good to have those nutrient-dense animal products in your diet.
Yeah, and I'm actually one of those people. So I was a vegetarian for 20 years, and I'm not, I mean. And I turned, I think, we were talking earlier about when I moved to Austin. I moved to Austin 2012. 2013 is when I started eating meat.
Wow.
Again, like 16 to 36, something like that. I didn't eat red meat or whatever. And that was, for me, like a big sort of like turning point was, okay, like, 20 years, and I've seen pictures of myself from like that era, and like I just look unhealthy because I'm just so skinny, and that combined with like powerlifting and other stuff, it's like my body changed, and like my wife noticed. She's like, like you fit much better into that, and like you're filling out in a better way. And she's like, that looks much better. I'm like, okay, yeah, there's something here. And, going down that route, and, I started in sort of like that paleo diet in 2013. But like through that process, it changed from, paleo, keto, carnivore, and each time it's just, like I'm getting stronger, and I'm not a young spring chicken, right? Like I'm 46.
Yeah.
But I'm probably stronger than I ever was, like back when I was a vegetarian in my 20s, when really I should have been a lot stronger. So you have evidence, and it's that's, at least for me, way more compelling than what a doctor says you should do. Based on some propaganda, on nutrition that they had like 3 hours of education in med school, right? Like totally.
What was it about vegetarianism that got you interested in it to try it, or at least incorporate it into what you're doing?
Yeah, I did that as a 16-year-old, and I realized now that I was manipulated by a lot of that propaganda, and like a lot of the things that I believed then I know now to be false. So one of the arguments was, it's better for your health. You want to be eating something that wants to be eaten, like plants that want to propagate their seed versus animals that want to live or something like that. Then after many years and reading more about it, it's actually the opposite. Plants have like all kinds of pesticides on them so that they don't get eaten, especially like the leafy green parts, which you need as a plant in order to grow. So like those are the things that they don't want you to like they try to toxify as much as possible. And the only reason like some of these things are edible at all is because farmers have changed them as significantly. And what's in nature is very different than what you see in the grocery store, which have been heavily modified, not just by like GMO or whatever, but by farmers just breeding the hell out of them to be way sweeter and like sort of in many ways very carb heavy and unnatural. Whereas animal meat is just so incredibly nutrient dense, and our bodies just know how to handle it. So learning about a lot of that, like a lot of the propaganda that was there, obviously the cruelty to animals and stuff like that, which I still kind of agree with. The way the like sort of meat industry treats its chickens and like hogs and stuff like that, I think is highly immoral. Which is why I like getting meat from Cole or somebody that like really honors the animal in doing that. But yeah, a lot of it was health, which I was a 16-year-old, so I think I just didn't know what the hell I was looking at, or what all of that was about. The other argument that I think has been debunked for me was, at that time it takes 7 times the amount of resources to produce the same amount of calories of vegetables than meat. And like after reading more about it, it's like, well, that's for a certain kind of farmland where it's like already fertile. Like cows can go on very infertile land, eat and like make nutrients out of that. Also, the 1 calorie is not equal to 1 calorie, and this is something that obviously you guys know very much about. But for a lot of people, they this is one of the lies of the nutrition industry. 1 calorie equals 1 calorie. You just cut down calories and that's it. No, that's just like a physics thing where you figure out how much energy something has by burning it. That's not how your body works. Your body is not a furnace that just like burns it, like with fire. It actually has pathways, and it knows how to use certain nutrients way better than others. And that's not something that a lot of people know about or even think about. And that for me was something that required some rethinking that I think I was deceived on when I was 16. Yeah.
And then you take it even a step further, and you start thinking about, okay, well, who's speaking about a calorie is a calorie is a calorie? And then one of the things we learned when we actually had Dr. Fecky's wife on, and it's like Coca-Cola and all these big food companies, they're sponsoring a lot of these campaigns, telling you to exercise, you can pretty much eat whatever you want. And you're like, it's insane once that light bulb goes off and you realize that there is a bigger agenda going on.
Yeah, and the thing that you realize, especially when you start working out, is abs are totally made in the kitchen, right?
100%.
It's like the first place that your body will store anything bad is right around the middle.
100%.
And the unfortunate thing is, like, you see the normal person out in the street, and that's where all of that fat is, and it's like, oh, guys, if you just stop eating tofu and, like your broccoli or whatever, and just eat, like, nutritious meat, like, that would go away. It's stop eating your pizza.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the thing about, like, the bad food is that they're highly addictive, and a lot of people just, I don't know, are in denial about it or want to justify it because they like being addicted to that food. I had a friend, right, like a college friend, somewhat overweight, and we were talking, and he's like, I did keto for 3 months. I lost like 25 pounds. I'm like, why'd you stop? I just love pizza, dude. I'm like, okay, that's your reason, but what about your health? Like, you're getting older, right? Like, don't you? It's like, I can't. I just love pizza too much. And I'm like, well, I mean, I guess, if an addict, if a heroin addict just said, I just love heroin too much, man, like, we would be like, you're crazy. Yeah, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
But when it's pizza, like, it's fine somehow. It just doesn't. But that's how people think, because they, like, there are a lot of people that have an interest in sort of like making their product acceptable where it's not. And this is where it's, I guess, maybe similar to altcoins or whatever. It's like, so a lot of people...
You're hitting on a core Bitcoin principle, the low time preference thinking.
Yeah, and that's the thing. A lot of altcoiners like to FUD what Bitcoin maximalists like me say. And it's because they want a carve out for their altcoin, right? It's always, like 99% of these altcoins are scams, but mine is fine.
Yeah.
It's like, everything's a scam except the stuff I own. And I'm essentially saying the same thing, but I'm actually right? Like there's a real verifiability to Bitcoin that altcoins don't have. And this is the same thing with food. It's like, okay, there's a subset of food that's really good for you. But a lot of this other stuff you should be extremely wary of. And you're actually better off just cutting them off completely.
Yes.
Rather than trying to pick and choose which ones might work for you. And I think that's the essential principle of like carnivory, right? Is just eat meat and, cut out everything else. Maybe it could be, maybe macadamia nuts are okay. I don't know.
Right.
But why take that chance? You have something way more nutritious.
Yes.
And they're like really good meat-based snacks now. Why do you need this other stuff? I don't know.
Totally. Yeah, and you touched on a good point too. You're talking about broccoli, and you're also talking about mac nuts. The self-experimentation is the most important piece of like stop taking things what people are telling you at face value, and do your own self-experimentation. Like we talk a lot about a food journal because when I first started going carnivore, I was like, okay, I feel great. But people are telling me that broccoli and kale and Brussels sprouts are good for me. So let me make some steak with some broccoli. And I started noticing, it's like, damn, my stomach doesn't feel good when I eat dark leafy greens. So maybe I should cut that stuff out. But we get a lot of questions about, like, we get these fringe questions in the DMs of like, hey, what about mac nuts? What about this? What about that? I'm like, well, do you feel good when you eat it?
Yeah.
If you feel good, keep eating it. But if not, don't worry about it. People, I don't know, it's like they just want the answer to be told to them. And it's not really an answer that can be told. It's something that you have to discover on your own.
Well, they want an authority to tell them stuff. And I blame like 12 years of public schooling for whatever, right? Like, because you're used to an authority telling you what the truth is instead of discovering it for yourself. And this is like the antithesis of how knowledge should be gained. You should verify things for yourself. And this is what we preach in Bitcoin. Like I said, like you go and learn all this stuff. Go read the white paper. Go and learn how to code. Go examine the code and see what it says. Look at the protocol. What is it? Like what's a transaction? What's a blockchain? What's a block? What's proof of work? And that's a level of detail that you really need to be able to answer these questions of, okay, is kale actually good for you or not? Rather than, that's a level that you need to determine whether an altcoin is legit or not too. But instead, what people want is go buy Ripple or go eat kale and, you'll be okay. And there's always going to be people that will tell you what you want to hear because they're financially incentivized. If you make kale chips, you're going to tell people kale's good for you. If you are a holder of Cardano, you're going to tell people Cardano is going to go to the moon. And it's that same sort of like principle of, it's a lot more comforting when you can just trust an authority and not have to go discover things for yourself. Because, like, what if you're wrong, right? Like, and this is where I think a lot of people find comfort. If you're wrong on something that an authority tells you, you have somebody to blame. Oh, that... Mrs. Wilson in third grade, she was wrong about whatever, and I naively trusted her, so I'm the victim here. Rather than, I investigated this thing and I was wrong about it, and, I got deceived by propaganda. That just makes you feel foolish. Yeah, that's how you actually learn, right? Like, that's actually better for you.
Yeah.
And, I told you guys about, like, how I was deceived at 16 about, like, what food was. But for me, like, this is how you become more fully human, by being able to think for yourself and not a robot or an animal that just like follows the orders of somebody else. Now, the system as it's constructed is much more interested in creating robots that will do whatever they say, and we saw this very clearly during the pandemic. But real like contribution that you can make as a human comes through being able to determine things for yourself and sort of use the gifts that you might have to contribute something to society. And the unfortunate reality is most people are very comfortable being cogs in a machine than, you know, something way more creative and more that could potentially make them a lot more money. But, you know, they'd rather have the certainty of authorities telling them what to do and having rules and essentially being a slave to the system rather than, you know, thinking for themselves.
Yeah, I think it's kind of unfortunate because I feel like most people would rather be ignorant and not have to handle the responsibility of like, okay, like I need to know this in order to like, you know, survive or do X, Y, and Z. They would just rather it be gifted to them and like, this is what you should do, this is what you need to do.
Yeah, and they can sort of like wallow in being a victim if things go wrong, right?
There's
it's like, oh, you know, like, yeah, I've been, you know, doing everything the way they said, and now I'm screwed over because I have like hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans, and, you know, I'm 30 pounds overweight, and, you know, I don't have a family or anything, and, you know, like, they start blaming the system as if they're the victim instead of taking personal responsibility and learning things for yourself. But that's kind of where you end up, right?
Yeah.
And this is, I think, a large part of the reason for, you know, epidemics of depression. Now, of course, there's like a nutritional component that we could talk about. But for me, the reason why a lot of people are depressed is because they should be. They're not contributing anything to the world. They're not doing anything that makes a difference. Of course you're going to be depressed. Like, should you be happy that you're contributing nothing to the world and being a leech on society? No, you should be depressed, right? Like, there's something right about like leeches feeling like they're leeches. And the unfortunate reality is that that stuff kind of gets medicated away, or, you know, and sadly, like, this is why you need pizza, right? Like, why you need sugar, why you need porn or video games or whatever. It's because it's a way to deal with the fact that you're doing nothing, and you're kind of caught in this like infinite loop of sadness and destruction of your own body and soul, essentially. But, you know, enough talk about that, I guess. It's like, this is where we are.
That was the cold hard truth.
Sean, was the concept of personal responsibility.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you've always been someone that's taken personal responsibility, or is it something almost like a muscle that you've grown over time?
That's a good question. I do feel like there's a personality trait of like independence or something like that, because I've never liked school, right? Like, and I've noticed this pattern about a lot of people in Bitcoin. They like almost none of them like school. Some of them might have done well in it, but it was like they all knew it was BS, right? And it's
but liked learning, like didn't like school, but were curious.
Yeah, and I like learning what I wanted to learn, right? I always did terrible in English class, and which is ironic because now I've written my short book. But like I never liked English class because it was like, okay, why are we studying this boring book, right? It's you know, I don't care about, you know, Dickens or whatever. Like I don't want to like write a book report on some story. Ironically, I would probably enjoy Dickens a lot more now than like if I were to choose it. But it always felt like an authority sort of like imposing their will on me more so than anything else. But I get that a lot of people find comfort in that, right? Because if you know the rules of everything and the promise, there's sort of like this corrupt bargain of you do what we tell you and you can get these things. And you're always sort of like paying with compliance or something like that, rather than sort of finding your own way. There's an uncertainty that comes with sort of like doing things on your own and creating things on your own and taking responsibility for yourself. Which, you know, if you fail, then, you know, you can't blame anybody. It's all on you. And, you know, whether it was a lack of virtue, lack of discipline, lack of whatever, or lack of knowledge, or, you know, you're just stupid, or you know, whatever it was, it ultimately falls on you. For a lot of people, they just can't handle that, right? They can't handle, okay, well, I wasn't good enough or whatever. They would rather have the certainty of like sort of going down a very well-trodden path, no matter how hard it may be. I've known people that got like PhDs at Harvard, right? Like, and they couldn't have like, they wouldn't step out of line on anything, right? And it's sort of like that path. And those are the people that tend to be complete no-quitters. They don't understand this idea of risk. They've always sort of done things that at least felt the safest. And that's almost always going to be within the confines of some authority, rather than, sort of like blazing your own trail and doing your own thing. And honestly, that's part of why I wear this hat, is it represents the frontier, the unknown, and like going and doing something that no one has ever done before. The bad news is that there is a lot of uncertainty around doing stuff like that. But the good news is that it's way more profitable, and there's a lot more opportunity, and you don't have to you don't have to do nearly as much to get there, right? Like I think about like how long it takes you to become a doctor, right? And it's like 12 years of primary school, then 4 years of college, 4 years of med school, 4 years of residency, and then you become a doctor, but you're like a young doctor, and then it takes you time to like move up the ladder or whatever. And that's like one of the better ones. Like you think about like being a CPA or like a drone at a company or something like that. Like try to work yourself up to the C-suite. That's not going to happen for most people, and it's such a crazy path, right? Way better is blazing your own path. Right? Like you don't have to wait 30 years to get the backup sports writer job for hockey for the Boston Globe or something. Like that's like a real path for like journalists. Takes you 30 years to become the backup guy for the Bruins or something.
Right. Just start writing about the Bruins.
Well, and that's sort of like the well-trodden path, but that's comforting to a lot of people. They get frustrated because they can't progress because there's so many people in line ahead of them. Well, but that's the path you choose on that sort of like well-trodden one. But blazing a new trail, it requires, first of all, personal responsibility and having to figure out what to do next, because that's not something at all obvious in these cases. Whereas like with like becoming a doctor, you know exactly what to do. All right, now I have to get into a good undergrad. Okay, now I have to do really well on the MCAT. Now I have to get into a med school. Now I have to take these board exams and pass them. And then now I have to go get a residency that's good in the specialty that I want. And, like it's so well laid out for you because so many people have gone down the same path. But it's also a much longer path, and you're going to have to wait in line for a long time. But, like entrepreneurship, it's so much more uncertainty, but so much better. And honestly, like stuff like this, right? Yeah. Podcasts or whatever, it's people kind of trying new stuff. But once it gets established, then it becomes more of a well-trodden path, which is what I'm noticing even about like this medium. Like if you were Gary Leland and you started doing podcasts in 2006, he was like one of the early guys. He's also a Bitcoin. And putting on the conference later this week, he was one of the pioneers. So he got in like very early. He started with like one of the early like podcast conferences and stuff like that. He blazed the trail, made a lot of money doing that, right? But now it's like, okay, well you have to get on this list, and then here's the next step, and you have to get on these other podcasts to promote your own podcast, and then you do this and this. It's becoming more systematized. So in a sense, like you always have to sort of push the frontier and figure out, okay, what can I do that no one else is doing, and what can I talk about that no one else is talking about, or what new thing, what dimension can I push in order to make something new that the market will respond to? And that's the challenge. And it requires a lot of creativity, and no one's going to tell you, you go do this and you'll get this success. No one's going to tell you that in any of this stuff. And, you know, certainly I'm sure you're familiar with this feeling of, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Yeah. I'm just going to try a bunch of crap and see what works. But that's what it's supposed to be like, because that's the market process.
It's so much fun too. When you get into it, like the first few times you're dealing with that the beginner issue of like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if anyone's listening to this. But then you start to validate things for yourself and you're like, this is so much more fun than doing anything that's guided by somebody else's authority or opinion. You're using your own creativity to build something that people are getting value out of. I think that there's something to that I'm sure you can relate with.
Yeah.
Some of the work you've put out that's like, this is satisfying because it's your own, in like, it's just a representation of how you are and like who you are.
Yeah, it feels much better because there's more of you in it, if that makes sense. Like, so if you get paid as an accountant for a big 5 firm or something like that, you know exactly what you're getting paid for. And like your boundaries on exactly what your job is are very clearly outlined. So if you step outside of those boundaries at any point, you will probably get reprimanded, even if it makes that company more money, because that's not your role. You stay you color within the lines, and it's you know, the lines are already drawn for you, right? Whereas with being an entrepreneur, it's you go and draw your own picture, and it might look like crap. It's not going to look nearly as good or whatever, but there's a chance that you might make something really good. And you know, you can kind of tell because other people start imitating you. At least that's where I find that, okay, like I've hit on something, because you see other people sort of like following the path that you've sort of blazed a little bit, and it's like, okay, if I was going somewhere that was completely worthless, no one would be following me. But okay, there's like, these people are trying to put out similar content. That's usually a good sign. And there's value to that, right? Like where you're creating something new that the market has wanted, that you know you couldn't do, but it required more of you to figure that out. Yeah. Whereas in a traditional job, it's like, okay, well, you know, I do these Excel spreadsheets and, you know, come up with these things and generate a PDF report, and that's you know, that or, you know, put in all the accounts receivable or something like that. Like, I mean, not to disparage that. I mean, I love my CPA and, you know, what they're doing for me or whatever, but there's sort of like a creativity in doing something new that no one's ever done before, that requires more of you as a person. And you know, to be fair to accountants, there are very creative accountants, especially in the Bitcoin space, that are figuring out like different things about, okay, well, you know, if you treat this thing this way, then, and that's really good. Yeah. And that's where I think satisfaction comes in, is when you're able to do all of that. But you're never really going to get that within sort of like the pre-drawn lines of corporate America, of essentially the fiat system. If you wanna draw your own picture, you gotta go out on your own.
Yeah. And you're the embodiment of that too, because I know that you're a programmer by trade, so that allows you to recognize the utility of Bitcoin. I think you got it in 2011, 2012?
11.
So you think about, you're talking about this concept of chasing the new frontier, and you being willing to do that. I mean, look at the position that you're in now in life, whereas if you just stayed a programmer at a tech company or in corporate America, you could basically plot every single point for the next 10 to 20 years of that career projection compared to where you are now, because you were willing to embrace the unknown.
Yeah, and not to say that would have been a bad life. No. I think I would have. Like, programmer salaries have gone crazy, and I'm sure I would have been part of that wave. But the thing about like working for other people that I don't think I realized was just how unsatisfying it is. And the reason why I didn't like school is the same reason I didn't like corporate America. It's just, it gets boring. Honestly,
boring as hell.
And it's just not. It doesn't use the parts of me. Like as a coder, I never got paid to go present something, right? Like in a crowd or whatever. I never got paid to go teach people. I never got paid to make video content or tweet or write articles or books or. And I could have pursued it within the confines, but it would have taken a lot longer. But with what I've done in Bitcoin, it's like, if I want to try it, I can, and there's nobody really stopping me, which is scary because it's like you have to kind of make your own boundaries, right? You have to draw the lines yourself, but at a certain point, it's like, what, like that's way better. I can, I'm feeling more confident as sort of like a painter of my own life rather than, okay, here's exactly what you're going to do, blah blah blah. Right. And it's it's especially uncomfortable being Asian because there's like a conformist streak to being Asian, right? And it's like Asian parents especially feel very comfortable with like the lines that are drawn. It's like, okay, you should go down this path and do this and that. But I think this way is just way better. I don't know, like, and it might be just for my personality. There are a lot of people that like the certainty of particular job or whatever. I'm just not one of those people, and I think a lot of people in Bitcoin are like that. So we're, it's just I don't know how else to say it. Just you become more of yourself when you pursue this path of taking responsibility for your own picture.
Yeah, it like solidifies the things that you love and like kills off the stuff that you're like, yeah, this isn't all that good.
Yeah, and you're wasting your time on so much stuff that doesn't matter, right? It's like, hated those meetings, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. What are you doing now that you're most excited about working on? Because you mentioned you're doing a variety of stuff, podcasting, writing, working on, you're on the Bitcoin Core development team too, right?
I mean, I've contributed and I have commits to my name and stuff, but I haven't contributed anything in a while. And a lot of developers go through this cycle where, it's like, you work on something, you get it in, it's like, I need a break or whatever. And the thing I realized about like contributing to Core is I could do it. I think I have the ability, I could do it. But my talent and drive was in teaching other coders. So, the thing that I did starting in 2017 was to teach other people how to program Bitcoin. And I've taught like 600-700 students at this point.
Wow.
And many of them are in a lot of different Bitcoin companies for sure. Many of them have contributed to Core. So I felt that was a better use of my time to churn out more Bitcoin developers rather than being a contributor myself, which I could do, but it felt like I had this unique skill set that I could leverage for the good of Bitcoin rather than contributing directly. I may still do that eventually. For other reasons of curiosity and stuff like that, but that's the choice I made fairly early on. Yeah.
Pre-2011, were you aware that you had this unique skill set for teaching and writing?
Not really, no. And it's funny because like my friend Michael Flaxman like made fun of me because he and I were working at the same company back in 2017 when I started writing these articles. And he would edit a lot of those articles. He's like, dude, the only reason you're famous is because you started writing a blog. I'm like, you're absolutely right. Because I started writing this stuff, and he would edit it, and he's like, this is good stuff. You should release it, and just gave him more stuff, and he kept editing it. The company at the time that I was working for at the time asked for some blog articles because they're like, okay, we need some content because we have a blog, we want more people to come to our website, blah blah blah. I was like, all right, I did this like 4 years before and nobody read my stuff, but all right, I'll write something. And then I wrote this article, and the guy that in charge of the blog said it was too Bitcoin centric and he didn't want it on there. So I was like, well, I spent a lot of time on this. I should publish it somewhere. Opened a Medium blog and just put it out there, and I think it was Jameson Locke that incorporated it into one of his articles, and I was like, wow, people actually like it. So I started writing more, and then I got invited to a YouTube show to talk about it, and I thought I did horrible that first one. But they were like, you were good, and you were explaining technical stuff, so they invited me back. And, the more reps you get on that stuff, the better you get.
Right.
The teaching part, I was just very frustrated with sort of like other coworkers that didn't know what I was talking about. So I started teaching them. And that became sort of like a business after a while, because I was like, I think people would pay for this, and I had something of a following by then, so that was just sort of like, okay, let's try it. Took me like a month to work up the gumption to go try it, because I think I was still in that fiat mentality of what if I fail. I was like, you know what? So what if I fail? I can always go get a programming job. I like, they're lacking everywhere. That's one thing I can always go back to should I completely get wrecked.
Right.
But it turned out okay, and yeah, that's been sort of my thing for a while, is educating people, programming, and otherwise.
Your most recent book is Thank God for Bitcoin, right?
It's Bitcoin and the American Dream.
Oh yeah, that's right.
It was up here, yeah. Right,
at least one
right here. There
Beautiful.
You go. There you go.
What was I'm curious about the Bitcoin and the American Dream, but for Thank God for Bitcoin, I think if you're inside Bitcoin, you probably can relate to that title. If you're outside, you're probably like, what are these guys talking about? Can you explain the title a little bit and like what made you guys want to write that piece? Because I think it's a really unique insight into Bitcoin and kind of society in general.
Yeah. So this all started because of COVID. So early, I guess it was 2020. I was communicating with George McHale, who's now with Bitcoin Magazine, right, or BTC Inc., like helping them with conferences and stuff. And he's a former pastor, and we found out that we're both Christians, so started talking. And at some point, I think there was another guy, and the three of us, and he was also a pastor. The three of us were like, let's just do a Bible study. Like we're Christian, and see what the Bible has to say about money. And we did it, and I think we each took turns like finding a passage in the Bible that talks about money, and there was a lot of them. And this was early 2020. And both of them expressed a lot of interest in continuing that, because it was very fruitful. Just, hey, like we know a lot more about money because we've been studying Bitcoin, and there's certain insights into that stuff that we were like, okay, there's probably something of value there. We're like, okay, but they were like, we know the Bible, right? They're both former pastors or whatever. So, but the thing that we don't really know is economics.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well, there's a couple of there's at least one book that I read that comes from the Austrian economic perspective and talks from sort of like a biblical perspective as well, and it was Jan Guido Holzmann's The Ethics of Money Production, which I had read, I don't know, maybe a year before. I was like, you guys want to study this book? Because I think it'll be a good way to, learn that. And they were like, yeah, absolutely. And they're like, also, could we invite some other people? So, all right. So I had met a lot of Christians during my time in Bitcoin up to that point. So I was like, okay, let's just invite them, see who comes. and then COVID hit, and we were like, okay, like none of us are able to even go to church, let alone like have Bible study. So let's just do this and like keep it going. So every Tuesday night at 6, I think it was, we just had a bunch of people, and it was over Zoom, and it was a chapter of the ethics of money production. And if I remember, it was like 15 chapters from that book, and so we did it for 15 weeks, and it was great. Mm-hmm. You know, just talk about it, and you know, talk about, and they're all Bitcoiners, so they were especially interested in this intersection of, you know, ethics, money, you know, Christianity. And by the time we ended it, we were like, wow, this was really good. Are there any other books like this? And somebody in that Bible study was like, hey, you know, like there's a book called Honest Money by Gary North. And Gary North was an advisor to Ron Paul. Okay. And he's, you know, strong Christian. He's put out a bunch of homeschooling curriculum books and stuff like that. And he's published a whole ton of stuff, calls himself a Christian economist. So we decided to read that, and that book I think is like 10 chapters. So next 10 weeks we did that. And we ended both books, and at the end of them we were kind of unsatisfied. Mm-hmm. Because while it spoke to the immorality of the current fiat monetary system, and it did so very well, both of them, the solutions that they were presenting were terrible, because it was, we need to go back on a gold standard, therefore we need to put a political action committee together and you know, dissolve the Fed and get us back on a gold standard. And you know, like, it sounds exactly like what I'm telling you. It seems like a political fantasy, right? Like, it's just not going to happen, and it's not realistic at all. And the thing is, we're like, okay, both these books were published before Bitcoin. I think one was like 2005, one was like 2006. We should write something that's a lot more encouraging, that focuses on, you know, why Bitcoin is the solution. So, and I had done this like book sprint process in 2019 with the Little Bitcoin book. I was like, you know, it's going to be harder, but you guys want to write a book together. And the 8 most faithful people to that Bible study got to be a part of writing that book. And we just, you know, we met every week. I think we kicked it off with like an 8-hour meeting. It's like, okay, here are all the things that we need to do first. And this was part of that like book sprint process, where you come up with all of the ideas that we need to convey and everything else. And honestly, a lot of that work was done in that first session of, okay, what's our target audience? What do they want? What do we want them to say about the book after they read it? And you know, where are they right now? How do we get them from point A to point B? And, you know, all the ideas we sort of like coalesced into chapters and stuff like that. And then we just got to work, and it was a little bit of a longer process than a normal book sprint would be, because it was week after week. Everybody, like, you know, we wrote the initial chapter, and then we just sort of rotated chapters, and everybody added their own thing. So everybody touched every chapter. And then towards the end, like, you know, we started doing a lot more editing, and we realized like we needed a conclusion chapter. We wrote it, we weren't satisfied with it, we rewrote it, we were happy with it. We put it through sort of like, we used Upwork to get a bunch of editors, and we got their feedback, put it back in there, and you know, George's like brother-in-law is Russell Kung, so he got him to write a foreword for the book, and yeah, and we released it. We were thinking, you know, maybe some people might be interested, but it did way better than we thought. Just in terms of, okay, like, you're hitting on a nerve that like very few people have really explored, which is the morality of money. And coming at Bitcoin from a very moral perspective, especially from a Christian perspective, which I think blindsided a lot of people. So But that was sort of like the reality that we realized during our Bible study, and it was like very much like something that we've been discussing for months at that point. And I was like, we just need to like lay out the argument in a straightforward way. And when it came out, a lot of people were very enthusiastic and supported us. And
Wow.
I still get like people coming up to me to this day where I'll go to a Bitcoin conference. It's like, that book really changed a lot. Either Christians that are like, I read the book and I got it and I've gotten into Bitcoin, or Bitcoiners that are like, I read that book and, I started going back to church again. And, so it's been sort of like an intersection of two worlds that I didn't expect, but very thankful for, obviously.
Wow, it's an amazing story. Why is there such a strong connection or convergence between Bitcoin and Christianity?
Well, I don't know if there's necessarily a very strong convergence. It's that I mean, I'm a Christian, so I think Christianity applies to all aspects of life, and it's an important part of everything, like sort of like our moral valuation of things. The thing that I realized, I think, after reading those two books is just how much our moral compass gets messed up by fiat money. And, we tend to think of loans and money in a very weird way. And a lot of that is just straight up morally deficient. And we don't recognize it as such. And quite frankly, a lot of Christians have no idea how money works.
No.
Or how it should work, or what it should be. So I think it's not necessarily that there's such an alignment between those things. It's that just Christians don't know that much about money, and we're just sort of teaching them, right? Mm-hmm. Here's what money actually is, and if you take the Bible seriously, here's what you should think about money. Right. And that has surprisingly been like. I don't know, like for me, like having studied Austrian economics and Bitcoin, it's like, okay, it's a fairly simple book. We're making points, but it's not like that complicated. But I've had so many people, it's like, no one's ever really laid it out for me like this. Okay, right. Here's how money actually works, and here's how all these people make, millions of dollars doing X, Y, and Z, and it's like, it's all theft. It's like, I didn't realize that. And now I get it. And it's like, now I'm buying some Bitcoin for that reason, because there's a real moral reason. But in a sense, it's just, okay, here's how you apply Christianity. They were. But are they like strong Christians that had these principles in mind? And that's what, I think that's probably stretching it. Like, Diffie-Hellman made asymmetric cryptography possible in like 76 or whatever. Were they Christians that like foresaw what asymmetric cryptography would mean for privacy and stuff like that? Probably not, but they came out of a civilization that valued knowledge and mathematics and all this other stuff that led them down that road. I think in that sense, all of this stuff that came out is influenced by Christianity.
Mm-hmm. One of the interesting things about our podcast and this episode in particular is that there are a lot of Bitcoiners that listen to the show, but there are also a lot of people that are more so, they're listening to us because they're interested about nutrition, health, wellness, that aren't as familiar with Bitcoin, cryptocurrency. So just based off this conversation, I think we'd love to just learn a little bit more about, from your perspective, what is it about Bitcoin that makes you so strongly compelled to go all in and teach other people about it?
Yeah, it's better money, straight up. And we think of like food as sort of like a base layer of your health, right? Like, because everything gets influenced by it, and if you have a pretty terrible foundation of food, then everything built on top of it is going to crumble. I see money as sort of like a base layer of civilization. And if the money is bad, everything else crumbles on top, and you build sort of like corrupt stuff, and you have certain health problems as a result of poisons that you're probably putting into your body without yourself knowing it. Well, fiat sort of does the same thing at a civilization scale. And the unfortunate reality is, like, a lot of the problems that we have now, it's directly attributable to fiat money. And if you want to know about that, you can go read my articles on Bitcoin Magazine, because it's just like, okay, here's politics, here's healthcare, here's real estate, here's college education. Like, all of these things are all corrupt because of fiat money in various different ways. So my pitch would be, okay, like, you don't really understand. First of all, if you think you understand money, you don't. And if you investigate money, you'll see how corrupt it is, and how it benefits just a few people at the expense of everybody else. And they're really just kind of taking your stuff without you really realizing. And maybe you do realize now because inflation's so high, but it's value being taken away. Somebody else is getting it. And it's the people in power, the banks, the government, the state governments, corporations, even, your neighbor that's taking out a mortgage without having the money. It's all diluted as a result of all those things. So once you look into that, then you'll understand better what's going on. So that would be my pitch, is like, okay, if you are interested in nutrition, well, you are, because obviously you care about your health, and food is like what makes up your body. Well, money is a lot of what makes up civilization. And if you don't recognize that, like, fiat money is sugar, right? It's corrupting everything. It makes a lot of institutions and things addicted, and it does terrible things on a long-term time scale that aren't necessarily seen as doing that. But I mean, I think they call dementia type 3 diabetes for a reason. The sort of like pandemic response and like the overreach of government, it's all sort of like enabled by fiat money. There's a reason why all of this stuff spreads. Cancer spreads way more in like an obese body that takes in lots of sugar and things like that. Cancer, fiat money spreads a lot. Like bureaucracy, rent seeking, bad behavior, all spread way more in a fiat system.
Yeah. Maybe just to put a bow on the conversation, we like to ask our guests, are you optimistic about the future? You just talked about money and how money has failed societies and civilizations previously before, but now we have this hard version of money, or hard currency that actually kind of works. So I imagine you're probably pretty optimistic, but I'm curious to get your take on how you view the future.
Yeah, I'm way more optimistic than a lot of my friends that don't have Bitcoin. And I think the pandemic thing was like such a good indicator, because so many people were just so depressed. And I'm sure you saw through your Facebook feed just the despair of people, right? Like, they're at home alone and doing nothing, and they don't have any hope for the future, because like, okay, is this all there is? And this is gonna be my life for a long time, is just Zoom dates and takeout food or something. And that was the reality for so many people. But if you have Bitcoin, then you actually have hope that civilization can get better, that you're not gonna get lockdowns, and you're gonna get people starting to wake up, and it's not like the powerful over the weak. And that's kind of a subtle thing that I think Bitcoin teaches, is you have some agency and power. With Bitcoin, you're verifying everything yourself. You're running your own node. You're sort of able to be master of your own domain, rather than being subject to somebody else that controls everything else. And the reason why people didn't have hope during the pandemic was because they felt like they were being controlled by somebody else, that their fate was not up to them. It was, either, some virus or authorities or whatever. And that's just not the case, right? Like, if you've tasted a little bit of that freedom, that, ability to blaze your own path and make something of yourself without needing the cooperation of authorities or whatever, then you realize, okay, like, yeah, I can make do. Even if, you know, this stuff doesn't work out, or you know, people try to, you know, there's always this spirit that's going to be there of self-responsibility and building things yourself. And that's what I think gives me hope now, is there are a lot of builders. There are a lot of people that want to make stuff and create stuff. Not shitcoins, like actual real stuff. And they want to work and make civilization better, and, you know, have their own families and stuff like that, rather than sort of like the depressed, woke, progressive, you know, I'm with the state kind of like mentality that I think was so prevalent during the pandemic. So, yeah, I feel really terrible for a lot of those people, because I know a lot of them like suffered quite a bit, but there's hope, and I think you know, the more depressing the rest of the world gets, the more hopeful Bitcoin becomes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you have hope, you have everything.
Yeah,
that's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, you know, we want to thank you for coming on the podcast, not just for coming on, but for both of us. You've been extremely influential in helping to further our understanding of Bitcoin, and also help us re-deepen our roots in the Christian faith. We were both like separately raised Christian, disconnected, which a lot of people do, I think, when they go through college or in their early 20s.
Yeah, woke university, yeah.
Woke you.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you almost have to have this like, I don't know if it's like an intrinsic reawakening where it comes from yourself, but a lot of the work that you've done in connecting with people in the Bitcoin space has helped us reconnect and kind of access that higher purpose. So just genuinely wanted to thank you, and you give us hope in the future, and hopefully we can have you back on for a part 2 at some point over a ribeye.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Well, if we're gonna have a ribeye, yeah, that's for sure. But yeah, that's awesome, and I'm glad you guys are making your faith your own, right? Like, and that's part of that, you know, taking responsibility for yourself, because, you know, all through sort of like grade school and this sort of like prolonged adolescence that's so prevalent today, you're told not to take responsibility for yourself. Yeah. It's like, just go with the flow and let the authorities decide, in which case you have no incentive whatsoever to figure out like your eternal destiny or what your morals should be or anything else. But as soon as you take responsibility for yourself, it's, oh, what are my morals? How should I behave? What are my rules of engagement? And how do I know if I'm doing something good or not? And it's not just a matter of conscience. It's like sort of training your emotions to feel good when you do the good things and bad when you do the bad things. And this is something that's a little bit lost today, but that used to be called moral education. It's to make sure, it's to train yourself so that your emotions are aligned with your values, which unfortunately goes the other way, right? Like for a lot of people, they do stuff that they hate, right? Themselves for, right? It's like, I spent 4 hours watching porn last night or whatever. It's like, okay, why'd you do that? I feel terrible about myself. I hate it.
Yes.
And I have no energy afterwards, but they do it because, well, they're addicted, right? Like that's what it comes down to. And that alignment of your emotional life with the values that you have, that's something that you kind of have to take responsibility for when you go down this road. So I'm very happy that you guys are, doing that for not just your meat and money, but for your morals. That's kind of like a base layer too, right? For your spiritual, emotional, social interactions with everybody else. So I say that little T leads to big T truth. There's there's a lot of ways in which you can get to that big T truth, including Bitcoin. But glad you guys are headed in that direction.
Yeah, it's been fun rediscovering it in our own way. I think we've done it a little bit together, but also independently. It's definitely a path that I think is enriching in the long run. You realize a lot about yourself and the world in the process. So
Your kids will be thanking you.
exactly.
Thanks,
Well,
Jimmy.
Yeah, thanks again,
Appreciate it.
Jimmy. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
That's great.
All right, man.
Thanks,
Thanks, guys.
This was awesome.
Yeah.